Welcome back to Through the Big Book with Dr. Ben. My name is Ben and I'm an alcoholic. We're on page 35 in the first full paragraph. This is the second part of More About Alcoholism. So we're about to go into the parables, but first, just to recap, we're talking about the mental states that precede a relapse. Why? Because that is the crux of the problem, and we defined crux in the last episode, which is the decisive or most important point at issue. So let's dive right in here. It says, what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who've reasoned with him after a spree, which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy, are mystified when he walks directly into the saloon. Why does he? What is he thinking? Why do you drink? Why is it that you drink? After all the stuff that happened, why would you drink? Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. So this is the Jim parable. And this one's got funny memes and, there's lots of Jim, Jim's a funny guy. You'll see here in a little while. So this man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. Strange thing to add there. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we'd found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he'd lost through drinking. So here is our lesson right here, right? I don't know. The moral, or not the moral, the problem of the story. Whatever that is. I'm not a big story. I don't know the story terminology. But anyways, he says, all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. That sounds familiar. Does it sound familiar to you? It is familiar. Let's turn back to page 14, paragraph 6. It's the very last sentence on page 12. All right. It says, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, isn't that exactly what we just saw? Failed to enlarge his spiritual life from page 35, yeah. And it says, through work and self-sacrifice for others. That's it. That's all enlarging your spiritual life is according to the Big Book, is work and self-sacrifice for others. That's it. And of course, there's more on page 15 there. It says he couldn't survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. And he would drink, and then to drink is to die, and then faith would be dead indeed. So that's it here. That's what he didn't do. He didn't work and sacrifice himself for others. That's it. So what happens? Something tells me there's a little plot twist here, or some consequences. Maybe not a plot twist, but some consequences. It says, to his consternation means amazement. So to his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he'd lose his family, for whom he had a deep affection. Yet, Jim goes and gets drunk again. So we asked him to tell us exactly what happened. He says in his story, I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated. So there's a little baby resentment, right? Remember irritable restlessness and discontentedness that we talked about in the doctor's opinion? That was on page 28, or Roman numeral XXVIII. Very last sentence. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort which comes from drinking. So, those are our pre-drinking states, right? So here we go. We got some irritability. because he's got to work for a business he once owned. He's got to be a salesman for a place he used to own. So he has a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then he decides to drive into the country and see. I'm sorry, I'll speak in his thing. One of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought that I'd get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which I was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I had sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still, no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich, so he's doubling down on these sandwiches, and decided to have another glass of milk. Here we go. Jimbo's about to shine, guys. Let's hear it. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk. There he is. Whiskey and milk man, Jim. Jim has arrived. I'm going to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk. He says, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. He's had 2 sandwiches. Come on, it can't be that bad. Just an ounce of whiskey. I've had 2 sandwiches. That's a good idea, right? Oh, come on, let's rationalize that, So, he orders a whiskey and pours it into the milk. He vaguely senses it was not... I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. There you have it. It says, the experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. It didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. What happens then? It says, thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. So, let's look that up real quick. What is an asylum? An asylum is an institution offering shelter. Oh, I'm sorry, that is not the right thing. Well, I would have to actually look that up. So it's a very dated thing. We don't have asylums anymore. Let me try to look this up here. Well, it's really kind of weird to find a definition here for asylum, but nonetheless, that's like it's kind of like prisons for people with mental health problems. It's not something that they're not around anymore, at least in the United States. I don't know anything outside of the United States, to be honest. Anyway, so it's not a good place to wind up. So it says here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. So there's Jim. What can we say, It says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call it plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? So the definition of insanity is not doing the same thing, expecting different results. That was an Einstein thing that came, let's see. So Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Einstein said that, but it's not the definition of insanity. The definition of insanity is the state of being seriously mentally ill or madness, extreme foolishness, or irrationality. But both of them, quite honestly, fit just fine. I'm not trying to say this is right or whatever, just trying to present all the information that I have. But anyways, it says, you may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We've sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there is always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Okay, so that's kind of like a confusing sentence, right? But what they're saying is like parallel means side by side. So if you're running in parallel, it's like running in track. You know, two people are running next to each other. It's like running in parallel. So we have this thought that's like, I should never drink again. I'm an alcoholic. You know, the consequences, blah blah blah. But then right beside it, just keeping right up next to it, is some trivial excuse for taking a drink, like she pissed me off. I'm gonna go drink at her, or F that guy. I used to own this concern, you know, this sales business, and now I'm a salesman for it. Like Jim, right? That's what they mean by that. And then it says, once sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out, which is like, yeah, I'm mad at her. I'm gonna go get drunk, and that's the insane idea. I'm gonna go do it again. Next day, we'd ask ourselves, in all earnestness and sincerity, how could have happened? Has that ever happened to you? Does that sound familiar? In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we're obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in light of what always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately, which is like I'm intending to go out to drink, rather than it being kind of accidental, right? It says instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. So even though I might wreck my car, get a DUI, kill, my son, I don't have a child, but, kill somebody that's in my car, kill somebody that in another car, etc., and wreck my entire career, my life, everything. It'd be fun because I'm mad at her. I'm going to go have the drinks anyway. You just don't even think about it. It's just, I mean, when you put it on paper like this, when you say it out loud, it's remarkable how, you know what I'm saying? I mean, wow. Our behavior is as absurd. Oh, I love this. Okay, so this is the jaywalking parable. I love this one. It almost always makes me laugh because it's so ridiculous, but it's so spot on. So, our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. Oh, and before I move on too far, there was a guy that I got sober with named Steve in Tulsa who had jaywalker on the back of his plate, his license plate, or on the back of his truck on his license plate. I love that man. So I don't know if you ever hear this, Steve, but if you do, I love you, miss you. Anyways, he gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you'd label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Well, then luck deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. That means back to back. Says you'd expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Uh-oh. He's going to send him to Dr. Ben now. So it says within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to laugh. I wish this story didn't make me chuckle, but it does. There's something wrong with me, everybody. All right, so it says, on through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit If we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? I mean, that's remarkable, right? I mean, some of the most completely incredible people I've ever known that were way smarter than me, far more capable intellectually than me, were just, like my old buddy TJ from high school, who he had this disease, and he unfortunately did not get sober and passed away. And a friend, Gavin, that I grew up with, they both passed away from this disease. Some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. I missed them, but they just couldn't hack. They couldn't cut this thing out. They were way ahead of their time in everything we were doing back in those days. But once this bug bit them, that they couldn't cut it. So miss you guys too. Rest in peace, both of you guys, for real. So it says some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. All right, here's this ego coming out. I'm special, I haven't had the same consequences as you, or I haven't lost it all yet, or I'm not that color, or I'm not a man, or I'm not a doctor, or I'm not living under the bridge yet, or whatever stupid ass idea you've come up with to make yourself, to flex your ego, to make yourself feel special, whatever that is. It all doesn't fully apply. I'm not exactly that. Like, okay, man. It says we admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you've told us that such things cannot happen. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. I might as well leave it with an F you very much, So it says that may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are unable to stop or moderate, because their brains and bodies have not been damaged, as ours were. Here we go. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. Is that important? It says this is a point we wish to emphasize. So I think so. And re-emphasize. Okay, dude. And it says to smash home upon our alcoholic readers. Oh my gosh. I mean, this dude is jumping off the page. If he could reach his hand out of the book and slap us to wake us up to read, to catch this point, I think he would. It says, as it's been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. All right, so what's he saying here? What does all that mean? What's he trying to get across? What that means to me is it doesn't matter how much I know about this stuff. It doesn't matter how educated I am. If I have a biochem degree and master's and an MD and all this experience and know the whole book and all this stuff, it does nothing for me. As far as keeping me sober. Knowing this stuff is much different than applying it. Self-knowledge is not enough. I am telling you, I can tell you from experience, knowing this stuff, knowing is all the ins and outs you can find is not enough to keep you sober. I have to apply this stuff. I have to apply it in my life. I have to apply it every single day. Every day. I am still recovering. I'm still just another, run-of-the-mill textbook alcoholic that has to do run-of-the-mill textbook alcoholic things to recover. That's just the way it is. We got to do stuff. We have to do these steps, which we'll talk about later. So that's what that tells me, is that there's much more than just understanding the problem. We have to take action and be consistent with it. Okay, so let's talk about Fred. So Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home. He's happily married and is the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearances, he's a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he'd gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, and here it is, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. So this is the difference between self-knowledge and accepting spiritual remedies. That's where Fred's going here. He's self-knowledge guy because he, in I don't know, was it every other area of life? I mean, really, you can pretty much put your mind to do something and do it, whatever that is. And Fred is a great case of that. He's been able to put his mind to everything before that and accomplished a lot. And that's the case. It might be the case with you. It might be the case with most of you guys. It's not that way with everybody, but some people can, accomplish a lot yet not be able to get in front of this alcohol thing, or not. We have to have spiritual help, and that's a new concept to some of us. It was a new concept to me. I didn't want to take it. I didn't want to do it. I think I'll explain in my third step and second step and stuff more specifically. It was kind of a reach to me, and I kind of just went through the motions because I didn't want to drink again. But anyway, so it says we told him what we knew about alcoholism, and he was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Here it is. Self-knowledge would fix it. So it says, we heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated that he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, and yet was flat on his back. Nevertheless, let him tell you about it. He says, I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly didn't believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I'd learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, and I'd been unusually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business for a time, and all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there's nothing new about it. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My businesses came off well, and I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. So here it is. So Jim was upset, right? He was irritated. He had a resentment. Fred says it was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. So Fred's everything's okay now guy, That's him. It's all good now. We're good to go. Not a problem in sight. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all. Nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being on an airplane bound for New York and finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. So this is the first time we're reading about blackouts, right? As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, but I'd made no fight whatsoever against the first drink. This time, I'd not thought of the consequences at all. So here's where we're talking about those strange mental blank spots. That's where this comes in. So it says, I'd commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered that my alcoholic friends had told me how they prophesied or predicted that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come. I would drink again. And they said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Sounds like they might have been right. It says, well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. This is pretty important here. It says, I know that, it's all important, but we're finding the moral of the story here. I knew from that moment on that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help me in those, here it is, strange mental blank spots. I'd never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then. It was a crushing blow. So 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. There's really not a whole lot to explain here, right? So 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as the one I'd exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. So here we go. We're seeing hopeless over and over and over again. Remember, that's part of step 1. That's part of getting to this step 1 is being hopeless. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. And though I'd been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. So those are like beliefs. That we'll talk about that soon. So, but the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. And that's referring to alcoholism, right? We're not talking about do AA, your taxes do themselves. You know what I'm saying? We still got to take care of that stuff on our own. We still got to take our trash out. We can't meditate and the trash takes itself out. You know what I'm saying? Alcoholism problems. So it says, I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. I agree here. And then it says, massively. It says, my old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I wouldn't exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. And with this, on that part, I hear a lot of people say, well, I had a lot of good times when I was drinking, bro. Of course, man. So did I. I used to play music. I was a drummer, and I got to play on stages in front of a bunch of screaming people, and do the autograph crap and all this stuff afterwards. It was a lot of fun, dude. Do I miss that? Would I like to do that right now? Of course, it'd be great to hop up on stage and pound some drums for a bunch of screaming people. It's a blast. It's an absolute blast. Would I trade that and all the stuff that came along with that, with my alcoholic life? Not to say that being a drummer in a band is a bad thing, because it's not. It's a great thing to do. But when I was doing that, I would get drunk afterwards and stuff, and I wouldn't trade what might seem to be boring now, because I have a very routine life. I have a lot of structure, a lot of routine. My days are very predictable. But on the other hand, there's words like reliable, or peaceful, or serene that I put a premium on. When I stop talking, it's just silent here. That's a premium to me. So, I would not trade my sobriety and my peace and my reliability and the relationships that I have for those moments and all the stuff that came along with it. That's kind of where I'm at with what he's talking about there in Fred's story. So it says, Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He'd only felt the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they can really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, Towns Hospital, and they're talking about Silky here, Dr. Silkworth. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As the two of you men whose stories I've heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. There's more hopelessness, you see. So, had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you, if I had been able to avoid it, because people like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. So that's why we're looking at this second step, right? Because no matter what kind of, what happened before, we don't think about the consequences the next time alcohol is put into our life or put in front of us, or we want to take a drink, however you want to say that. Then it says, except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So we're seeing here that we're really in a lot more trouble than we might have realized. That this is a much more complicated thing. That you're saying that no human power, no human being, no psychiatrist or physician or judge or police officer or parent or friend or boss, anybody is going to be able to help give us this defense against the first drink. Pretty wild. That's kind of a weird concept to consider. But thank goodness we have this higher power deal now. And so that's why this comes along, and that's why the next chapter, which is called We Agnostics, which again, forgive me for doing these a little bit out of order, but that's why this entire next chapter is devoted to this concept of talking about a higher power, because a lot of people have a lot of trouble with it. So it was a pleasure, and we will pick it up. We'll just dive right into We Agnostics next. It's something that I've already recorded, and again, forgive me for them being out of order, but nonetheless, I hope that was helpful. And if you guys have any questions, you just let me know at drbenaa@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So I hope you guys have a blessed day. It's Friday here, and the sun is out, so I'm going to go walk the dog and get some exercise. And thank God for this beautiful day of sobriety that I've been given. So until next time.